Lieutenant Commander John Thatch sat in the cockpit of his F4F Wildcat on the flight deck of USS Yorktown, Bureau number 5171. The morning sun caught the oil-stained wings as deck crews finished their final checks. It was June 4, 1942. 400 miles to the northwest, the Japanese carrier fleet was steaming toward Midway. Thatch commanded 6 Wildcats from Fighting Squadron 3. Just 6 fighters to escort 12 slow torpedo bombers into the teeth of the most powerful naval striking force ever assembled. The numbers were wrong. The aircraft was wrong. Everything intelligence had told him about the Japanese Zero was wrong in the worst possible way. And what Thatch carried in his head might be the only thing that could save his pilots. 3 weeks earlier, Yorktown's fighter squadron VF-42 had been transferred out. Thatch brought VF-3 aboard with 16 combat seasoned pilots and brand new F4F Wildcats. The F4F was the latest version with 6 machine guns instead of 4 and folding wings that let carriers pack more fighters on deck. But it came with a cost. The extra guns spread the same ammunition over more barrels, cutting firing time from 34 seconds to 20. The folding wing mechanism added weight that reduced climb rate and maneuverability. Against the Zero, every ounce mattered. Thatch had spent the past year thinking about the Zero. In September 1941, intelligence reports reached fleet squadrons describing a Japanese fighter with performance that seemed impossible. Rate of climb exceeding 5,000 feet per minute. Turn radius so tight American pilots called it suicidal. Top speed of 331 miles per hour. The Wildcat could manage 318. The Zero could outturn, outclimb, and outrun the primary fighter defending American carriers in the Pacific. In May, at the Battle of Coral Sea, Wildcat pilots discovered the intelligence had been conservative. The Zero was everything they feared and more. Pilots who tried to dogfight Zeros died. Pilots who tried to outrun them died. The few who survived did so through luck or by diving away before the Zero could close. Thatch refused to accept that his pilots were flying death traps. Every evening in his quarters at Naval Air Station San Diego, he worked on the problem. He used matchsticks on his kitchen table to simulate dogfight scenarios. 2 matchsticks for American fighters. Multiple matchsticks attacking from above. The traditional defensive tactic was the Lufbery circle, where fighters turned into a defensive wheel for mutual support. Against the Zero, it was suicide. The Zero could get inside the circle and pick apart defenders one by one. Thatch needed something different. Not just defensive, but capable of putting his fighters on offense against an enemy with superior performance. He positioned 2 sections of fighters flying abreast at a distance equal to the Wildcat's turning radius. When Zeros attacked one section, both sections would turn toward each other. The attacked section would lead pursuing Zeros across the path of the second section, which would be perfectly positioned for a head-on shot. He called it beam defense position. In April 1942, he tested the concept with VF-3. Thatch led 4 Wildcats as defenders. Ensign Edward Butch O'Hare, who would later receive the Medal of Honor, led 4 Wildcats as attackers simulating Zeros. O'Hare was one of the best pilots in the Navy. If anyone could break the tactic, it would be him. O'Hare tried repeatedly. Every attack put him nose to nose with defensive fire. After landing, he found Thatch on the flight deck. "The skipper, it really worked," he said. "I couldn't make any attack without seeing the nose of one of your airplanes pointed at me." Thatch had never tested it in combat. At Coral Sea, no Zeros challenged the strike. Now at Midway, he would get his chance. At 0838 on June 4th, Yorktown began launching aircraft. 12 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers from Torpedo Squadron 3 lumbered off the deck. Lieutenant Commander Lance Massey led them. 17 SBD Dauntless dive bombers followed from Bombing Squadron 3. Then Thatch's 6 Wildcats. Captain Elliot Buckmaster commanding Yorktown, or Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, the task force commander, had made the decision. Only 6 fighters. Thatch had protested. He wanted 8 aircraft in 2 4-plane divisions to properly execute beam defense. 6 fighters meant incomplete sections, odd numbers that violated every tactical principle. The order stood. Thatch briefed his pilots on the flight deck over the roar of warming engines. "Nobody goes lone wolf," he said. "Lone wolves don't live long under these circumstances. Stick together. That's how we survive, and that's how we protect the torpedo planes." He took Ensign Robert Ram Dibb as his wingman. Lieutenant Brainerd McComber and Ensign Edgar Red Dog Bassett formed the second section. A partial section of 2 more pilots, Lieutenant Tom Cheek and Ensign Daniel Sheedy, would follow. Yorktown had launched 90 minutes after Enterprise and Hornet. The American strike was uncoordinated, scattered across miles of ocean, racing toward 4 Japanese carriers. But Yorktown's planes had one advantage. They had fighters. 60 miles out, the torpedo bombers, flying at 1,500 feet, spotted wakes cutting white lines across the Pacific. The Japanese carriers' striking force. 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, protected by battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. And somewhere above them, Zeros. Lots of them. The formation climbed. Thatch kept his Wildcats weaving above the vulnerable torpedo bombers. At 12,000 feet, he spotted them. 15 to 20 Zeros diving from altitude. The Combat Air Patrol had spotted the American formation. Bassett's Wildcat, trailing the formation, took the first burst. Tracer rounds walked up the fuselage. The Grumman shuddered, slanted toward the water, and burst into flames. Bassett never had time to transmit. Macomber's aircraft took hits. Bullets stitched across the wing and fuselage. But the rugged Wildcat kept flying. Thatch radioed his remaining pilots. "We've called. Execute the weave." But they had never practiced with 3 aircraft. Macomber's radio was shot out. Dibb had only practiced the maneuver a handful of times. As Zeros swarmed around them, Thatch made split-second calculations. 3 planes. Incomplete sections. Zeros attacking every 20 to 30 seconds. He called to Dibb. "Move out to the right." Wide separation. Macomber stuck close to Thatch, not knowing what else to do. They started scissoring back and forth, taking snapshots at approaching Zeros. A Zero overshot Macomber, correcting his aim for another pass. Thatch was already there. He fired. The Zero shed part of its cowling and burst into flames. "First kill." Dibb called over the radio. "There's a Zero on my tail." He didn't need to look back. The attacking Zero was 4 to 5 degrees off his tail, beginning to track him through the turn. Thatch called back immediately. "Turn into me now." Dibb turned hard toward Thatch. The Zero followed. Thatch turned toward Dibb, passing underneath his wingman. The Zero pilot suddenly found himself looking down the barrels of 6 Browning machine guns. Thatch squeezed the trigger. The Zero's engine caught fire. Second kill. It finally dawned on Dibb what the maneuver required. He moved out wide to the side. Zeros attacked. The 3 Wildcats wove back and forth. Most Zeros broke off their attacks, finding themselves repeatedly facing head-on fire. The aggressive ones pressed their attacks and paid for it. Thatch scored a 3rd kill. Macomber damaged several more. Behind them, the torpedo bombers died. Without fighter protection, Torpedo Squadron 3 flew straight and level into concentrated fire from Zeros and ship-based anti-aircraft guns. Zeros tore through the formation. One TBD after another fell burning into the Pacific. Of 12 aircraft launched, 10 were shot down. Not a single torpedo hit. But the Wildcats had done something unexpected. They survived. Against 15 to 20 Zeros flying superior aircraft, Thatch's 3-plane section held its own. The beam defense position worked. The tactic would later be called the Thatch Weave and would be adopted throughout the Navy and Marine Corps. More importantly, they proved the Wildcat could fight. It couldn't outturn the Zero. It couldn't outrun it. But with the right tactics and teamwork, it could kill Zeros and bring pilots home. While Thatch fought over the Japanese fleet 300 miles northeast on Midway Atoll, 26 Marine pilots climbed into their fighters. 21 were obsolete Brewster F2A3 Buffaloes. 7 were F4F Wildcats. Marine Fighting Squadron VM-221 under Major Floyd Parks had been stationed on Midway since Christmas Day 1941. At 0555 on June 4th, radar detected a large formation 93 miles northwest. 108 Japanese aircraft from the 4 carriers. 36 Zeros escorted 36 dive bombers and 36 level bombers. The math was brutal. 26 American fighters against 36 Zeros plus 72 bombers. Parks scrambled every aircraft. Within minutes the taxiway was jammed with fighters urgently launching into the dawn. Parks led one division of 8 Buffaloes and 5 Wildcats. Captain Kirk Armistead led 12 Buffaloes and 1 Wildcat. At 14,000 feet 30 miles from Midway they spotted the Japanese formation. A massive V of V's of Kate torpedo bombers in front. Val dive bombers stepped up behind them. Zeros in escort position above and behind. The Marines attacked immediately. For the first few passes they had clear shots at the bombers before the Zeros could react. VMF-221 pilots tore into the formation. Captain Marion Carl flying Wildcat Bureau number 4000 latched onto a Zero and fired. The Japanese fighter went down. Then the Zeros engaged. What followed was slaughter. The Buffalo was even more outmatched than the Wildcat. Slower, heavier, less maneuverable. The Zeros carved through the Marine formation with practiced precision. Japanese pilots had been flying combat missions since 1937 in China. Many Marine pilots had been out of flight school for less than 4 months. Major Parks died in the first minutes, his Buffalo flaming into the ocean. Across the sky Marine fighters burned. Pilots tried to bail out. Some made it. Most didn't. The survivors scattered using clouds for cover, diving toward the water, anything to escape. Second Lieutenant William Brooks flying Buffalo Bureau number 01523 discovered his landing gear was stuck 1/3 extended, creating massive drag. His radio produced no volume. Alone damaged, he fought anyway. He watched squadron mates die around him. When he finally broke away and returned to Midway his aircraft was riddled with bullet holes. Captain John Carey flying Wildcat number 4008 was jumped by multiple Zeros. Bullets ripped through his cockpit. One round hit his wrist. Another grazed his skull. Blood streamed down his face. The Wildcat kept flying. Carey managed to land on Midway with a critically damaged aircraft and serious wounds. When the recall went out, only 10 VMF-221 aircraft returned. Of those, only 2 were airworthy. 13 Buffaloes had been shot down. 2 or 3 Wildcats were lost depending on conflicting records. 15 Marine pilots were dead or missing, including the squadron commander. 4 more were wounded. The sacrifice bought time. The Japanese bombers hit Midway hard. Hangars and barracks burned. But the runway remained operational. And every Marine fighter that engaged a Zero was one less Zero protecting the carriers when American dive bombers arrived. Japanese combat air patrol pilots were flying their 3rd or 4th engagement of the morning. Fuel was low. Ammunition was depleted. When Enterprise and Yorktown's dive bombers appeared overhead at 10:22, the Zeros were out of position, unable to climb fast enough to intercept. In 6 minutes, American pilots destroyed 3 Japanese carriers. Akagi Kaga and Soryu blazing wrecks that would sink before nightfall. But 1 carrier remained. Hiryu launched everything she had. 18 Val dive bombers escorted by 6 Zeros headed southeast searching for the American carriers that had devastated their fleet. At 11:50, Yorktown's radar picked up contacts 32 miles west-southwest. 12 Wildcats were already airborne on combat air patrol. 8 more F4Fs from Enterprise and Hornet joined them. Under Yorktown's fighter direction, they intercepted the Japanese strike at 11:56. 20 F4F Wildcats against 24 Japanese aircraft. But this time the Americans had altitude advantage and radar warning. They tore into the formation with slashing attacks. VF-3 pilots from Yorktown engaged first, followed by VF-8 from Hornet and VF-6 from Enterprise. 11 of 18 dive bombers went down before reaching attack position. But 7 got through. At 12:10 they began their dives on Yorktown. The carrier twisted violently through the water, her anti-aircraft guns hammering the sky. 5 bombs missed. 3 hit. The first bomb penetrated the flight deck and exploded in the uptakes, killing everyone in the vicinity. The second hit amidships, starting fires. The third struck near the island, rupturing fuel tanks. Within minutes, Yorktown was dead in the water, billowing black smoke. But her fighters had decimated the attacking force. Japanese losses were catastrophic. Of 24 aircraft that approached, only a handful made it back to Hiryu. Yorktown's damage control parties worked miracles. By 1350, less than 2 hours after the attack, she had extinguished the fires, patched the flight deck, and brought boilers back online. She was making 5 knots and could achieve 20 if needed. At 14:27, radar detected another strike. 10 Kate torpedo bombers from Hiryu escorted by Zeros. This time, American fighters vectored by radar made contact at 12 miles out. VF-3 and Fighting 6 from Enterprise engaged immediately. The Wildcats shot down 6 aircraft before they could begin their attack runs. Frigates got through. They came in low, barely above the waves, splitting to attack from multiple angles. 2 torpedoes hit Yorktown's port side. The carrier shuddered. Damage was catastrophic. Electrical systems failed. The port list increased rapidly. At 14:58, Captain Buckmaster ordered abandon ship. But the torpedo bombers paid the ultimate price. Not one returned to Hiryu. Every attacking aircraft was shot down by Wildcats or anti-aircraft fire. Thatch, who had landed on Enterprise after the morning strike, scrambled again for the afternoon defense. He shot down at least 1 Kate and possibly a second. His division of VF-3 pilots reported 8 Kates and 2 Zeros destroyed in the afternoon engagement. Scott McCuskey, executive officer of VF-3 flying Wildcat White 11, intercepted several VALs during the first attack. He claimed 3 destroyed before running out of ammunition. Later that afternoon, during combat air patrol, his flight ambushed Zeros, claiming 3 more. McCuskey personally shot down 1 and damaged another before his wingman drove off a Zero that had latched onto his tail. Throughout June 4th, Wildcats flew continuous combat air patrol over the task force. Pilots scrambled, refueled, rearmed, and scrambled again. The afternoon strikes on Yorktown cost Japan every attacking aircraft. Not because the Wildcat was superior to the Zero, but because American pilots used radar intercept tactics, teamwork, and the aircraft's strengths against enemy weaknesses. The Wildcat couldn't dogfight a Zero, but it could dive faster. Its heavier construction meant it could sustain damage that would destroy a Zero. It carried more firepower. 6 50 caliber machine guns could shred an unarmored Japanese aircraft in seconds. American pilots learned to avoid turning fights. They used slashing diving attacks. They fought in pairs using the thatch weave to protect each other. When a Zero got on your tail, you turned into your wingman, who would be turning into you. The Zero pilot suddenly faced a head-on shot or had to break off. The tactic spread throughout the Pacific. By the Battle of Guadalcanal in August, every Navy and Marine fighter pilot knew the weave. Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's top aces, encountered it over Guadalcanal. He described the frustration of attacking a Wildcat only to see its wingman coming at him from the side, forcing him to break off. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nejima raged when he returned to base, having been forced to dive and run for safety. The numbers tell the story. In early 1942, during the battles of Coral Sea and Midway, the Wildcat to Zero exchange ratio was roughly even. By the end of the battle for Guadalcanal in February 1943, Navy and Marine pilots were shooting down 5.9 Zeros for every Wildcat lost. By the end of the war, the ratio had increased to 6.9 to 1. The Wildcat flew 15,500 combat sorties from carriers. It destroyed over 1,300 enemy aircraft at the cost of 178 aerial losses, 24 to ground fire, and unknown numbers to operational accidents. 8 Wildcat pilots received the Medal of Honor, all but 1 posthumously. At Midway, the Wildcat's greatest contribution wasn't kills. It was presence. VF-36 fighters were the only American fighters that engaged over the Japanese fleet that morning. Their presence even outnumbered forced Japanese combat air patrol to split attention between defending carriers and attacking American strike aircraft. VMF-221's 26 fighters on Midway absorbed the attention of 36 Zeros during the morning strike. Those Marine pilots, many of them dead or wounded by battles, and degraded Japanese fighter effectiveness at the critical moment when American dive bombers appeared. And when Hiryu struck back, Wildcat pilots formed an aerial shield that decimated both attacking forces. Yorktown died, but the Japanese lost 2 complete strike packages. Every pilot, every aircraft destroyed defending that carrier was one less threat to Enterprise and Hornet. The Wildcat held the line when America had nothing else. It wasn't fast. It wasn't maneuverable. On paper, it shouldn't have survived against the Zero. But it was tough. It was heavily armed. And in the hands of well-trained, aggressive pilots using innovative tactics, it killed Japanese aircraft and brought pilots home. John Thatch survived Midway, shooting down at least 6 enemy aircraft during the battle. He was awarded the Navy Cross. After Midway, the Navy pulled him from combat to teach other pilots the weave and develop additional tactics. When Japanese kamikazes appeared late in the war, Thatch developed the Big Blue Blanket system, providing continuous fighter coverage over American ships. He retired as a full admiral in 1967 after commanding U.S. naval forces Europe. Throughout his career, pilots called the defensive tactic he developed on his kitchen table the Thatch weave. It remained in tactical manuals for decades. Fighter pilots still study it today. Marion Carl, who shot down his first Zero flying a Wildcat from Midway, went on to become the Marine Corps' first ace. He flew with VMF-223 at Guadalcanal, running his total to 18.5 kills. After the war, he became a test pilot, setting world altitude and speed records. He retired as a major general. John Carey, who survived being shot through the wrist and grazed across the skull at Midway, recovered from his wounds and returned to combat. He flew Corsairs in the Pacific, accumulating multiple kills before war's end. Floyd Parks, who led VMF-221 to their deaths over Midway, received a posthumous Navy Cross. The squadron was decimated but reformed. Flying F4U Corsairs, VF-221 accumulated 185 air-to-air victories by war's end, second most of any Marine fighting squadron. 23 members of VMF-221 received the Navy Cross for their actions on June 4, 1942. Most posthumously. The Wildcat was replaced on fleet carriers by the F4F Hellcat beginning in late 1943. The Hellcat was faster, more powerful, better in almost every way. But it was the Wildcat that held the line at Coral Sea, Midway, and Guadalcanal when the outcome of the Pacific War hung in the balance. 7,860 Wildcats were built. Nearly 3/4 by General Motors' Eastern Aircraft Division, which took over production in 1942, allowing Grumman to focus on the Hellcat. Wildcats continued flying from escort carriers throughout the war, where the larger Hellcat couldn't operate from smaller decks. They hunted U-boats in the Atlantic. They supported amphibious landings in North Africa. The last Allied air raid of the war occurred on May 5, 1945, when Wildcats sank a German U-boat off Norway. The British Fleet Air Arm received over 1,000 Wildcats under Lend-Lease, calling them martlets. They flew combat missions from escort carriers in the Atlantic and Mediterranean. A martlet scored the Wildcats' first kill on Christmas Day 1940, shooting down a German Junkers Ju-88 over Scapa Flow. Museums preserve Wildcats today. The National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola displays multiple examples, including one recovered from Lake Michigan where it crashed during carrier qualification training in 1942. Air museums around the world showcase the stubby fighter that defied expectations. The Wildcat teaches a lesson that transcends aviation. Superior equipment matters, but it doesn't determine outcomes. Tactics, training, teamwork, and the courage to engage despite the odds can overcome technical disadvantage. Japanese pilots in 1942 flew objectively superior fighters. They had more combat experience. They should have dominated. They didn't, because American pilots refused to fight on Japanese terms. They developed new tactics. They used their aircraft's strengths and protected its weaknesses. They fought as teams, not individuals. And they were willing to die to buy time for their strike aircraft to sink enemy carriers. At Midway, 6 Wildcats escorted a doomed torpedo squadron and survived by using an untested tactic developed with matchsticks on a kitchen table. 26 Marine pilots threw themselves against superior numbers, knowing most wouldn't return. 20 carrier-based fighters intercepted 2 Japanese strikes, destroying nearly every attacking aircraft at the cost of their carrier. None of it should have worked. All of it did. Because the pilots made it work. The Wildcat was just the tool. The men flying it were the weapon. Yorktown capsized and sank on the morning of June 7, 1942, taking with her the Wildcats that couldn't be recovered. She had been mortally wounded by Japanese torpedoes, but her sacrifice bought time. While Hiryu focused on revenge, Enterprise and Hornet dive bombers found and destroyed her. All 4 Japanese carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier burned and sank at Midway. The battle turned the Pacific War. Japan never again achieved strategic initiative. But victory hinged on hundreds of small actions. Dive bomber pilots who attacked despite overwhelming odds. Torpedo squadrons that died to draw down defenses. Fighter pilots who engaged superior aircraft with inferior numbers using tactics invented weeks earlier. And a stubby outmatched fighter that refused to quit. The Grumman F4F Wildcat. Slower than the enemy. Less maneuverable. Outperformed on paper. But tough enough to take punishment, deliver firepower, and bring pilots home alive. At Midway, that was enough. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. If you want to hear more forgotten chapters of history, subscribe and hit the bell icon. Drop a comment telling us which World War II story you want to hear next.